leadership, you know, he says it better than me, but you should never be the smartest person in the room. And so I've always tried to surround myself with people who are smarter, more talented, more gifted in areas that I am not. And so I can graciously say to all of you, you're all smarter than me. Thank you for being a part of Engage the Nations. And so I tried to find the smartest guy I know, and that's not an exaggeration. And somebody with the experience that, because all of you are a part of this ministry, and so I thought this would be a great topic of discussion to talk about culture, and not just the culture of another country, but how do you continue to develop a missionary culture and a ministry culture with families, all this kind of stuff, with that in mind, but really focusing on leadership. And so, so let's go for it. I have a few questions, and then we'll just kind of go for it. Okay. So let's talk about how do we meet. So I don't remember, okay, again, you're more detailed than me. Was it 15 years ago, 12 years ago?
I think it was 12. Yeah, it's now 12, 13 maybe.
So basically 12 years ago, Michael took a class from me, got to just have a lot of fun, probably more fun for me than him at the time. But it was a really great just experience of just teaching certain things, kind of weekly class where you really get to know somebody. And one of my favorite things, and this is where you know somebody's like a leader, loves to be challenged. He showed up late one day, and I don't remember how I said it to you, but I was like, I just kind of challenged him and said, you're late because of this issue right here. And he just looks at me and he goes, I will never be late again. Yeah. And for the rest of the classes, he was never late. So
that's true. I'm still late for other things, but I wasn't late for that.
So it's good.
I can take feedback, I guess.
Yeah. And I also, so anytime I have an opportunity to have Michael speak, I always invite him. When I was at Seattle Revival Center and led the School of Supernatural Ministry, we literally had some of the most famous charismatic ministers come in. Many of them are very talented, anointed, gifted. But I can tell you this, while that's all true, the best speaker, the best communicator we had was Michael by a long shot. And that was the funny thing is we had all these people, and then it was kind of like towards the end of the year, here comes the big guns. So no pressure. But my point is I really respect and honor who he is and what he brings to the table. And you guys know I don't like make stuff up and butter people up. So yeah. So thank you so much for coming.
Well, you're too kind.
Yeah. No, I mean,
don't thank me yet.
So I wanted to start off with culture. So you have been on the board of many nonprofits. You've traveled the world. You've done leadership in many different cultures, continents. But talk a little bit about what is culture to you, or what is a healthy culture to you? And I know it's different in Russia than Israel, but just overall, what would be healthy culture as far as you're concerned?
So it's a good question. Maybe a little context. So my background has nothing to do with ministry at all. In fact, I've run HR functions for major companies for the last 25 years. So companies you probably recognize, GE, Pepsi, Microsoft, H&R Block, DocuSign, there's a few others in there. And recently, I guess when the pandemic hit, I thought, what a great time to shift gears a little bit, right? And so I ended up sort of quasi-retiring from my HR roles. And then that has led to a whole bunch of people reaching out to me. And like you mentioned, I'm on the board of a bunch of for-profit startups. So I'm working with startup organizations, and I'm working with nonprofits as well. And you know what? The reason that people reach out to me is because I have seen it at scale. I've seen what organizations look like at $100 billion and 200,000 people. And I've seen organizations at 3 people, 2 people in a garage figuring something out, and everything in between. And as you mentioned, it's having worked, and I think the last time I checked, like 110 different countries around the world. In fact, one of the jobs I had people on my own team in 12 different time zones. So I was constantly navigating that. In fact, my daughter, I have 3 daughters at home, by the way, our one's in college now, 20, 17, and 13. And my 20-year-old used to fall asleep to the sound of me on conference calls with Russia almost every night, because one of the first things I learned about that culture, and you don't learn a lot about cultures from a distance, but you learn when you go there. So when you think about the United States of America, and this will get back to your long way around and back to your culture question, when you think about us, and there's a pandemic and you work from home, what does that mean? That means instead of sitting in an office, you sit in your living room. You basically have the same Wi-Fi. You basically have the same setup, although you got dogs barking and kids running around, and but on the other side, you don't actually have to wear pants and stuff, so it balances itself out. That's not the case in other parts of the world. When the first time I traveled to Moscow, I had a huge team in Russia. I was in Novosibirsk. I was in Moscow. What I realized was that's not the situation. Oftentimes they go home to a small flat, maybe with an entire family. Maybe they might not have Wi-Fi, maybe just their phone. And when you realize that, what that meant was, if I wanted to work with that team, it had to be middle of the day for them, not for me. I couldn't run the world as if I was the center of it, right? I had to run the world as if they were the center of it. And so what that meant was I was as often double booked for calls at 1 a.m. as I was at 1 p.m. Now, that might sound horrible to a lot of you, but it doesn't mean you work 24 hours a day. What it means is you can just as easily be not working at 10 a.m. as working, and you just have to think about your life in a very different way. The concept there behind that, though, was to think of others first and their context. In fact, when you were talking about the guy, what's his name? Gideon. I learned some incredible lessons about language. It's not just that they're speaking a different language than English. It's that we have so many metaphors in our language that we don't even realize that we're using. And we have different ways of interacting, and I'll give you an example of this. So if I were to, it's nice to meet you in person, by the way. I've seen your picture so many times, and I've heard a lot about you. So if I were to ask one of you, hey, I need that report at 5 p.m., or I really appreciate if you get that report to me at 5 p.m., what'd you hear? What'd you hear?
Deadline. Get it done at 5.
You got to get it done at 5, right? You know what they hear in Russia? It's totally optional. It's completely
If
optional.
you feel like it. Yeah.
The reason is because we take direct orders and we put a lot of flowery language around it. We say, I would really appreciate it if you were to do this. They're like, oh, well, I'm doing you a favor. I don't want to do you a favor, so I don't have to do it. Now, I would run into this in India. I would run into this in China. I had teams in Malaysia, Singapore, all over Asia. And you would get on the phone with somebody and say, okay, well, this is what I need you to do. And they're like, yes. Okay, but can we get this? Yes, absolutely. And you're like, oh, that was easy, right? I thought I'd get some pushback. And then the day rolls around and you don't get anything. So you call them up and you're like, hey, what happened? I thought we were going to do this. Yes. I don't think this means the same thing in these two different languages, right? Yes meant I hear you. It did not mean I agree with you and I will commit to doing this. So you had to get much more precise around your language. Now, the reason I bring that up is if you think about culture, like how many of you have been part of a large organization before? Okay, a lot of you. And if you were to be asked to describe the culture of that organization, what happens is it probably falls somewhere in between what they aspire that culture to be and what it actually is. In fact, if you want to know about a culture of an organization, you don't go read their values. You go talk to people and say, well, what's it like working here? That's what a culture is. It's this very sort of fuzzy, hard thing to grasp. In a way, a culture is kind of like, I was doing this the other night. I was out with my wife and we actually had a starry night. And you know those stars that you can't see if you look right at them, but if you look a little bit to the left or right, you can see them. Like, I was like your rods or your cones, I forget, rods I think, can pick up light differently than looking directly at it. That's kind of like culture. Culture isn't something you define, it exists. In fact, culture is more about what you tolerate than what you aspire to be or what you ask people. In fact, it oftentimes is more about what you tolerate and accept than what you actually are. So how do you build a culture? First of all, you have to be aware. Like, what is it? How do people experience this? What does it really mean? Do we all experience something the same way? You know, we don't. So you also have to think about all the different nuances, just like you were describing with Gideon, different nuances of what we say and what they hear. Now, it's easy to see when we're talking about someone in the U.S. or and someone in Africa or someone in Japan and somebody in Australia or someplace. It's easy to see that those differences exist, but they exist in this room. We all think about things differently. We all have a different way to internalize things. So if you think about what a culture is, the nearest I can describe, it's what exists somewhere between what you say you are and what you actually do. And it changes. The fastest way to change a culture of an organization is to simply change the people. And it changes. I'll give you another example of this. I was at a company called DocuSign. Anybody heard of DocuSign? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for using our product. I had a lot of stock. I did very well with that. But I joined the company. We had about 1,000 employees, which might sound like a lot of people, but in tech industry, right? That's a very small company. And so I went and asked all the employees, "What's the culture here? What do you think it is?" And what I heard from them was that the majority of what I heard was, this is not the same place as it used to be. We used to know everybody. I don't know if you know this, but DocuSign went like this for like 10 years, and then boom, went like this. So it had like somewhere between like 20 and maybe 100 to maybe 200 people for like 10 years, and then all of a sudden it exploded. It's like 5,000 today. Just a hockey stick. And so the people were describing that it used to be this small place, and we knew everybody. And now it feels like it's not like that anymore. It feels like it's different. It's big. I did the same thing 1 year later, and what I got was totally different, completely different. They said, no, I expected it to be kind of more like Google or Apple or Amazon or something when I joined, and I'm like, wow, we're like 2,000 people, right? The expectations completely shifted in that period of time. And so if you think about like what culture is, it's hard, right? I mean, if you can write a book on how to nail culture, you can just retire. But the reason there's so many books out there is because nobody really understands it and nobody really gets it, because it's a byproduct of something, it's not something itself. Does that help?
Yeah.
Or did that confuse matters?
No, it's good. So, how would you, when you've been in these different organizations, how do you develop healthy culture or try to move it in a healthy direction when, whether it's the most dysfunctional place, because I know you've worked in dysfunctional places, or whether the ship's going really well. Like, how do you move that ship or the needle in the right direction?
So, I think that the challenge is to think about what is it that you want to be? What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, this was really cool, by the way, to hear about this. How much do you need for the band?
I think about 12,000.
Okay, I'll take care of your band for you. All right, so your band is done. But if you think about who you are and what you want to do, I sat and listened to some things that you are doing, but I have no idea what you aspire to. Now, granted, I've been involved for 20 minutes, right? So maybe that's understandable. But I don't have any idea. It's like, okay, so you got some random guy driving around in Pakistan who may or may not do something with churches. That wasn't clear. And then you're building a school in Malawi. That's what I heard. I don't know what that is. I don't know what is it that you're trying to do. I mean, it sounds like you're like everybody else. You just want to go help some people that need help, which is super noble and really cool and great to be a part of, but I don't know what that is. And so, if you think about a culture is a byproduct of something that you aspire to do. You know, what was it, Gates or somebody used to, desktop, a PC on every desktop or something, right? Like I work for Pepsi. I don't know what our culture really was other than carbonated sugar water and selling more than the other guys, right? We want people to buy Pepsi instead of Coke. But whatever it is, there has to be something you're aspiring to do. And then your culture needs to enable that. And it's really not that complicated to understand. But then you go look at the practices that you have and say, do these things we're doing lead to that outcome? You know, like Jesus said, go be my disciples, you know, carry the message. You know, what's the culture of the church supposed to be? That seemed pretty clear. I mean, I've read the New Testament many times. And yet, what is the culture of the church today? That's a scatter plot, right? Mm-hmm. Depends on the denomination, depends on, you know, location, depends on a host of other things. So if you want to build a healthy culture, the first thing is to figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and then what do you need to get there. Now, you can have a culture that says, oh, we're a learning culture. That's one of the things that comes up a lot. You know, we want to be a culture of learning. Does that sound like a good thing?
Sounds nice.
No, it's terrible. You want to be a culture of learning means that you are constantly in a situation that you have to learn from. It means that you're trying new things all the time. It means it's chaotic. You know, I've been in so many organizations that say we're a learning culture but don't step out of line. Like, that doesn't make any sense. What does that mean? We want to be a supportive culture. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's great to be supportive of each other. But how does that play itself out? Does that mean it's all kumbaya, it's the get-along gang, and that's the priority? Is it we're going to have candor with each other, we're going to help each other grow? Is it, you know, we're going to sort of debate, align, execute on things? You know, these are the things that you just have to think through. And the number one thing to do is to be aware of who you actually are, and is it working or not? And is it enabling you to accomplish your vision? Now, I'd love to sit down and say, you know, here's what I do to build a healthy culture here, but again, I'm not sure what the vision is.
Right.
But you know what it is, or some semblance of it. And so then just ask yourselves, what are the things that we're doing that enable that, and what are the things that we're doing that we think kind of hinder that? Mm-hmm. Now, it's crazy to hear me say this. It's like, it sounds self-evident. Nobody does it.
Right.
You know, I mean, I've made an incredibly good living because most managers are terrible at what they do. That's been most of my job for 25 years, is to deal with the fact that we can't just, you know, lead people effectively. That's what HR is most of the time, is to deal with the outcomes of that, right? So it sounds simple, but it's difficult. And it's difficult because we're constantly tugged in different directions. One of the other elements of culture that I think is really important is that your culture will shift as your priorities shift. You know, Jesus talked about, you know, where your heart is, you know, that's where your treasure. Your treasure, there it is. I was thinking money. Yeah, where your treasure is, which is not just money, but it's like the things that you focus on and value, that's where you'll go. And I'll give you a great example of this. How many of you bought an iPad when they came out? All right, iPhones, right, with the little touch screens, whatever. I remember sitting in meetings at Microsoft 3 years before the iPad came out, looking at that technology, and Microsoft had it way before Apple. So what happened? Microsoft had a much better little like music player than the iPod.
They outsourced the hardware.
They only cared about Office and Windows, because it was where 98% of their money came from. You always follow the money. Always. And so their culture could not shift to go a different direction because they couldn't take their eye off of this because that's where all the money was. And as a result, that caused them to have a big shift, and then they went into the cloud and doing a bunch of different things. The only reason Xbox worked at all in that environment is because they incubated it and they would not allow any Office and Windows people to even go to any meetings about Xbox. They wouldn't even let them in the same room together. They put them in a different building and you were not allowed to go in, and that's the only reason Xbox worked, is because it had a different subculture than this one. So I think, your culture can be, it can be whatever you want it to be. And it's going to be something. That's the thing. It's one of those things that you don't get a choice of whether or not you have a culture. And guess what? You don't get a choice of, and the culture is not created by somebody else. It doesn't matter who the leader is. It doesn't matter what you write down. You are the culture. You're all participants in the culture. You all create the culture. So, those are all things that you have to think through. Yeah.
I was just gonna, I guess, make an observation. We are inherently selfish and think about ourselves first. And I was sitting here thinking, as the leader, you have to communicate to each of us, how do we help you with the vision? Or how do I fit in? How do I buy into what the organization is trying to do? What's my piece of it, maybe? So that's just, I guess, something I'll have to ponder. But we all have, different gifts and different skills, and some of us have a lot of time and not very much money. Others have a lot of money and no time. So maybe that's something from that to an area of growth. Maybe is understanding how to communicate where we can, pitch in. Yes.
Yeah, and I think Jesus did that, and Paul talked about it really clearly, where he used the example of the hand and the foot and different spiritual gifts, and it's only when they all come together that it actually works. But you're right, if you have an aspiration of what you're trying to accomplish, and you have a set of sort of principles and guidelines around how you're going to act, then you have to bring the context down to everybody. What does what you do create this? And I always think about the example of I don't know where it comes from, about people that were laying the bricks, and so they asked one guy, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm putting bricks on top of each other." And they asked another guy, "What are you doing?" "I'm building a cathedral," right? They're both doing the same thing, but they have a completely different mindset towards it. And you're right, all of these things come into play, and if they're not clear, then what you're going to get is what you're going to get. Doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. It could be really good. You asked a question about dysfunction. Dysfunction does not mean that you're not productive, right? In fact, I would say one of the things that I've had to deal with the most in my career, may sound strange, is this belief, in particular for HR people, because HR, a lot of people that sit in human resources are there because they're people, and they want to make a difference or whatever, right? And I'm sure that's fine, but it's to not make the assumption that because something is chaotic, something is wrong. To not make the assumption that because there's friction, that something is wrong. Because I am uncomfortable, something is wrong. Because we don't know where this is going and it seems chaotic, we must fix it. That is a very sort of human perspective that we have that has nothing to do with the reality of the world we live in. It has everything to do with the fact that we just don't like being uncomfortable. Like, if you ever had somebody who didn't want to give feedback to somebody else, and you ask them and they say, "Well, why don't you want to give feedback?" Like, "I don't want to make them uncomfortable." I'm like, no way. You don't want to be uncomfortable. Don't put it on them. You don't want to be uncomfortable. Because the hardest thing to do as a leader is to enable people to be uncomfortable. But guess what? You don't develop or grow unless you are uncomfortable. And it's that inability to deal with that paradox that causes us a lot of times to run around and try to fix stuff that's not broken. So it's dysfunctional, okay? And are we still moving down the road? Are we still getting stuff done? Are we still accomplishing some things? You know, I years ago I worked in, so I ran this catering company. We did concerts and films. So I'd dating myself a little bit here, right? A little bit older than you. Every band that came to Seattle from 86, 87, 88, I worked backstage with. So Madonna and Motley Crue, all these people, right? And I mean, I could tell you all kinds of crazy stories about rock stars, because that's what I had to do. I had to deal with the no brown M&Ms and all that nonsense, right? But it's that concept of front of the house, back of the house. If you've ever been at a hotel and it had been a nice banquet and then made a wrong turn into the back, and all of a sudden it's cement floors and there's chairs stacked and it's just, it's ooh, shut the door and it's now a nice wallpaper or whatever. Front of the house, back of the house. It could be as chaotic as can be back there. But do you care when you're in the front? If you're watching a play or a concert and you enjoy the concert, does it matter to you how chaotic it was backstage? It does not. So, but we live in both worlds. So a lot of times what we do is we think, oh, this dysfunction and friction that we have in trying to get something done is in fact the thing we're trying to do, but it is not. Gideon might not experience any of that. This random guy in Pakistan driving around who's gonna get a van, he doesn't know that we're dysfunctional or care, I don't think. So I think part of it is to recognize which of the things that go on in our culture are going to inhibit our ability to produce an outcome, and which things are just, we wish that was a little more comfortable. And I've seen organizations ignore stuff that became problems, and I've seen organizations over-focus and over-engineer what's going on behind the scenes because they didn't like it, and it actually caused them to miss stuff that they were trying to produce. And you know this if you've ever been in a restaurant and you've listened to a bunch of people, like the waiters and the cooks yelling at each other, and you're like, I don't really care about who showed up to what shift, just get me my hamburger, right? That's a good example. But we're all like that. Every organization is like that. How we get things done is not the same as what we accomplish. Because the last time I read the Bible, all of those people seem pretty messed up. Seriously, I mean, God only works with broken people. That kind of sounds like this really kind of noble, caring thing. No, there's no choice because there aren't any other people. So I think part of it is just to be aware and remember, keep your eye on what we're trying to accomplish, and fix the stuff you need to fix. And if the stuff's chaotic, okay. So it's chaotic.
So ride the wave of chaos.
Ride the wave of chaos. Absolutely. Chaos has caused a lot of good things in the world. It's caused a lot of bad things too, but it's a constant in the equation. It's not something that we should. This feels chaotic, so we got to fix that lack of chaoticness. No, it could be that's just how human beings work together, and we should just deal with it.
So my next question is, most of us, or I'd say all of us, have a mission, kind of discipleship, and these words, of course, they mean different things to different people, but in general, wanting to raise our kids up, not necessarily be missionaries, but have a leadership perspective, and just have this kind of mindset where I would imagine, most of the people in this room have gone to other countries, done short-term missions like yourself, and so there is that, continuity, but how have you, I know some stories about your father, your mother, you had wonderful parents, you still do, But what are the things that kind of shaped you from them, the positive things, and then how have you adjusted, readjusted the culture of your family as a leader, as a father, as 3 daughters, which will lead into my next question about leading women, but we'll get there. But
Occupational hazard for me, by the way. So, I don't know. You know, I don't know how to answer that question. I guess my life is so complex, and when I think about the impact that my parents had, I'll tell you a story that maybe will illustrate it. So my father worked at Boeing, right? So we're in the Northwest. It's not an uncommon thing. He was there for 33 years. And I went to his retirement. They did a big retirement party for him. And I was living in Denver, I think, at the time, and I flew back and I went to this thing. And I listened to these stories that they were telling about how they would work all-nighters. And my mom's nodding her head, like how crazy it was. And I was sitting there going, I don't remember any of that. Like, at all. What I remember is my dad coming home for dinner and we played catch, or basketball, or we'd throw the ball around, and that's what I remember. And so afterwards I went up to my mom and I'm like, that was weird. I don't remember that at all. And she looked at me and she goes, yeah, he would come home for dinner. He would hang out with you guys. We'd get you to bed, and then he'd go back to work.
Oh, wow.
I don't remember that. And I think we're also egocentric that we take ourselves so seriously. But then we realize our kids are not experiencing that. They experience a total different reality. And what I remember from my parents was just simply one thing, is that I had unconditional love and support. It's not, they did a lot of stuff. I was the oldest, so they experimented a lot on me. And my sister-in-law came up the other day, and one of my nephews, he's had a little bit of a rocky road of late. She says, oh, your parents are so understanding. I'm like, those people? And she said, oh yeah, your dad said, we learned a lot on Michael. And yeah, a little bit of I have a rather crazy background. So I think about myself as a parent, and what I've tried to do is, and I used to do this thing because I used to travel all the time. I was constantly on planes, and every time I got on a plane, I would text my daughters. When they got to the age where they had phones and they could get texts. You're smart, you're beautiful, and I'll love you forever. And I texted that to them thousands of times. If I go up to any of them today and say, remember, all I have to do is say the word remember, and they will repeat that. I'm smart, beautiful, and you'll love me forever. Because I may do some really good things as a father, I may do some bad things as a father, I may set some good examples, some bad examples, like my 13-year-old got in trouble at school for not wearing a mask. And I'm like, my wife's like, gee, where does she get that from? As I go into grocery stores, I'm like, I'm not wearing a mask, And so I don't know that I'm a great father per se, but what I do know is that I want them to know that. I want them to know that they're valued, and and I want that imprinted in their psyche, so it's just simply so part of who they are that they don't know what it would be like to not think that or feel that. And so if you go back to how you take something like that and how it's influenced me, and if you go back to an organization, it's back to what is the core of what we're trying to do. What's the one or two things that are just over and over and over again? We are here to help other people for Jesus. That's what we're here to do. That may take this form or that form, and we might do it well or not so well, and we might bicker and fight along the way, and we might, learn some lessons or whatever, but are we consistent in what we're doing? I'm on a nonprofit of an organization called MAP International, and we send medicines and supplies and PPE and antibiotics and stuff all over the world. And what I've really enjoyed about MAP is there's all kinds of stuff, but every week I get emails that go through the same thing. Here's what we had, here's what we shipped, here's who got it, here's how they're using it. Here's how many people we served. Now, sitting on the board, I will tell you, there's all kinds of stuff going on. Like, we gave an award, or part of our board was part of a thing for Dr. Fauci, and a bunch of people quit because, you know, they don't like Fauci. And I mean, there is a back of the scenes, there's a bunch of friction. But what do? We send antibiotics, surgical supplies, you know, whatever it may be, vitamins, whatever, to people all over the world who need it. And we stay consistently on that path. And so that seems like a pretty good thing. I mean, that's why I'm part of the board. I don't agree with everything that we do. I don't agree with all the people on the board. I had to turn my camera off on the last board meeting for about 10 minutes so they wouldn't see my facial expressions. But it doesn't matter. That's okay. That's just part of how it is. But what the mission is, we're all a part. And here's the irony for me, is that I look at the New Testament and I'm like, thank God the church was so dysfunctional. Because if it wasn't, we wouldn't even have the New Testament. The whole New Testament is letters from Paul to the church going, stop doing that. Do this stuff instead. I mean, think about the irony of that. We don't even have the New Testament unless they're all dysfunctional, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And a lot of those people, that was like Jesus had literally just been there, right? So I think we give, I think we put too much emphasis sometimes on the wrong things. You know, I'm not, you know, I make a lot of mistakes with my kids, and I make a lot of mistakes, period, and I speak too freely sometimes, and, you know, like anybody else. But at the end of the day, what are they going to experience? So if I'm a good father or not, I have no idea. You'd have to ask my kids, you know. And I think most of the time they'd say yeah. But it's not because I got it all right. It's because there were maybe a couple things that I was consistent on and did well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's talk about women in leadership. So you have led many women, especially in the HR, and the context is the kind of ministry we do attracts a lot of women. The fact that we have 4 men here, and 4 manly men, not feminine beta males, is
I don't know enough about you to make that determination.
but it really is. It's almost a miracle.
Yeah.
Kids are forward handle.
Especially with the way the church is and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, we'd like to attract more men. But did you ever come across a point where you're like, wow, we just have all women here, we need to get some more men? Or did you just find, anyway, do you understand kind of where I'm going?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, I remember one time, one of my friends who was having a particularly interesting love life, shall we say, and said, I just don't understand women. And I sat there and I went, okay, I report to a woman, I have a wife, I have 3 daughters, and I have a team of 38 people, and 2 of them are men. That's my world. That's where I live. It's all girls all the time at my house, 24/7. So, first of all, I think that's an awesome thing. Like, I mean, I think, to be honest with you, most things women actually do better than men. Now, if you go back, there's a lot of controversy about Timothy, 2 Timothy, right? The whole thing about should women be leaders and stuff. And I had to go through this at my own church, and we were going to get a new pastor, and they wanted me to help. And so I said, okay, here's the first question. Can women be a pastor, right? And they're like, well, you know, I don't know. I'm like, okay, go figure that out, because that's one of the first things we need to address. I'm like, I don't really care one way or the other, but whatever it is that you decide should be based on what the scripture says. Now, if you look at the Bible, women played a ridiculously 1000x more prominent role in the Bible than they did in society at that time. Right? I mean, by a massive margin. You know, we use our 2021 goggles to look at stuff now and go, oh, how terrible it is. But the Bible was written 2,000 years ago, and there's women all over the place in the Bible, which is great. So I think it's wonderful that women are involved in ministry, personally. I think, now this is, by the way, this is not, it might be heresy even, but it's just my opinion, so I'm just going to tell you. I think 2 Timothy was written to address your question right now. I don't think it was written to say, hey, women, you know, sit down, know your place, you know, put a hat on, be quiet. I think it was written because men weren't stepping up. Plain and simple. Men weren't stepping up. So the fact that you have a lot of women involved is an amazing thing. I think women in the world have the ability to build relationships quicker, to engage people at a heart level at a much faster and more consistent way than men do. I think they're better communicators. I mean, there's all these positive things about women. So the question on men is, how do you get men involved in things that men bring to the table? So what are men good at? Men are good at getting things done, right? And you know, how many of you, and I'll talk to you as men, how many of you have ever had your wife come up and describe a problem that happened at work, and you're like, oh, well, here's what you do about this. And then she goes, I don't want it, I just, you know, then gets all mad at you and walks away. And I'm like, no, that was a really good suggestion. Like, I do this for a living. This is exactly what that's not what she was after. She just wanted me to listen to her and empathize with her and go, well, you're awesome, honey, and you know. She didn't want me to solve it. But what are men good at? Well, a few things we're good at is we're good at solving stuff. We see point A, point B, you know, boom, let's go get there. So I think you have to have things that appeal to that, and you have to think. There's a couple ways to look at it. One of them you could look at the way I had to in the workforce, which is it doesn't really matter.
Right.
The job is X, and it doesn't really matter if a man or woman does it. But in ministry, it's a little different. I think you have enough things here within your ministry that there are things that men might be more attracted to doing. If it's to go solve a problem, you know, if it's we got to go out and fly to this country and work really hard and carry beams around and dig ditches and stuff, you probably get more men interested in that than women. I don't want to stereotype anybody, but that may be the case. But there may be other things that women are better at. So, look, it's disappointing to me that more men aren't stepping up right now in our country in general and in the world in general. And oftentimes when they are step up, they're not stepping up in the right ways. But at the same time, the whole culture is telling them to sit down and be quiet and not do the things that men are good at. So I think as an organization, one of the things that you could do is be a place that allows people to be themselves and bring their skills to the table and go accomplish things in different ways. But I wouldn't discourage, I mean, you know, I would never discourage somebody for, you know, I would never discourage women from participating. You know, if you had a choice of, I can get 10 more people to participate and 8 of them are women, or I can get 5 more people to participate and 3 are men, I would take the 10 every time.
Right.
So, it doesn't seem like a terrible problem to me, and I have no idea how to solve it, to be honest with you.
But it's good to hear, because it goes, when you're describing chaos, this isn't chaos, but it's one of those things that comes up. People are like, why aren't there more men? Why aren't there more men? And there's 50 answers, you know. But
Well, it's a good question. Why aren't there more men?
Right. And I know in what you've done, because you've heard your situation, it's mostly women.
It is, and if you think about it, a lot of times, HR in particular, at least the field that I've been in, has generally attracted, because it's a sort of a people kind of business, it's attracted women who, you know, I guess generally are seen as more empathetic, but in reality, that's not what the job is at all. And that being said, if I think about some of the meanest, most direct, ambitious, sort of type A people that I've ever worked with, they're all women. I mean, I've worked this woman I used to work with, my former boss, one of my many former bosses. She would say stuff in meetings, it was unbelievable. And I remember having to tell, so one time I was sitting in a meeting, and she just ripped this person, just up one side, down the other. And I won't tell you her name because you're probably putting this thing on YouTube. But I said, what so-and-so meant to say was, this is a pretty good effort, we need a little, She looked at me and she goes, I didn't say that. You bleep and bleep and bleep. And so she yells at me and everyone's now really tense in the room, and I go, what she meant to say was, she appreciates the feedback, right? So, her and I got along really well. But she was tough as nails. So I think we can overemphasize that whole gender thing, but in reality, the more the merrier. If we can go solve some problems and help some people, let's do that.
Right.
And if women don't step up, if men don't step up, then great, bring their wives along and let's go make it happen.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's why we have so many women.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah. So
Did I offend anybody yet?
No.
Okay. I gotta try harder, I guess.
I know some button pushes. No, just kidding. I wouldn't do that. So maybe we'll kind of wrap up with this last one. So we're coming into year 5, which could mean a lot of different things in an organization. But kind of the polar, the polar things of what do you see ruin an organization, and then from the opposite perspective, and you've kind of answered this, but maybe if you want to come at it from a different angle, what has caused organizations, like different ones you've been a part of, where if you look back and go, what are the things that actually sustain them? Because it's like, this is our vision, but you're like, you're kind of over here. But it's still, the widgets are still getting made.
Yeah.
There's still productivity. But talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the fastest thing, or the thing that you have to be really careful of, is you go after the wrong bright, shiny object, and it will end up consuming the organization. So, again, I have no idea how you end up with some random guy with a van in Pakistan and a school in Malawi. That makes no sense to me. But it's cool, it's great, but of all the things in the world, how would you write that on a bumper sticker? I don't know, right? I don't know what that even is. It's cool, but I think if you think about your growth, you're going to have opportunities to go make a difference. Things are going to come in your path. I love the fact that you talked about, I had a sense that maybe I ought to tap the brakes a little bit. Maybe I need to think differently. Maybe I shouldn't just throw a bunch of money over the fence and hope for the best. Maybe I have to be a little bit more wise in that. Jesus talks about being, as innocent as a dove and wise as a serpent. And I think the combination of those things together is really important. But you're going to have some opportunities that are going to take you places that you might not expect. And you have to maintain what your principles are along the way. And it's as simple as, in most businesses, it's a follow the money. You might take on a big customer, and instead of building the products that all of your customers need, this customer becomes so big that you end up building only what they need, and then it doesn't work for other people, and it actually hurts your business. That's a concept to think about, and it happens all the time. I got to one company in particular, and it was, our whole engineering team was like watching a bunch of 8-year-olds play soccer. No one plays any positions. It's just it's 2 goalies and a big crowd of people around the ball, right? That's how it works. And instead of us saying, here's a roadmap and here's what we need to build and here's where, here's our vision and whatever, we just ran after the money wherever the customer needed it. And what we produced as a result of that was something that really wasn't workable. So as you get pulled into a bunch of different directions, there'll be a tendency to just go, yes, we want to do that, yes, 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 yes. And you have to be careful about doing all those things and the impact that it will have. Now, it could be great stuff, right? It could be really good things. But, you could also end up just being, we only do this, and miss out on all this other stuff.
Right.
I took my my daughters, my wife and I, down to Roatan, Honduras, a few years ago with our church, and we built a school out in the jungle there, which is an awesome experience because, my kids think hardship is like spotty Wi-Fi, right? So I'm like, I can't explain how ridiculously privileged you guys are, and there's no way you could ever comprehend it. I mean, I forced them to watch like Slumdog Millionaire and some, try to get some movies that will depict that you really should be very grateful for what you have. But there's nothing quite like saying, oh, get on a plane, we're going down there. And they had a life-changing experience as a result of that. And it caused them to see the world differently. Now that organization, we stopped serving after a while because that organization kind of did a follow the money thing and ended up in a completely different place. Now I think it's since sorted itself out and we're back wanting to support them again. But it happens all the time. And it happens especially in ministry. If we think about what we're most susceptible to, it's not like direct attacks on our faith or something. It's we're susceptible to pride, and we're susceptible to success, and we're susceptible to, doing something because we can do it. And I think you just have to, in particular ministry, I think you just have to stay in prayer of whether it's the right thing to do. And be willing to say no sometimes. And also, just have some faith and, let it work out. And, remember that if you find yourself going down a path that's like, wait a minute, this is now totally different than where we were. And especially if you get more people. There's never been a problem where the answer, like an organizational culture problem, where the answer is we need more people. Like ever. That just adds complexity. The more people you have, the more complex it gets. I was working one time with an organization. They said, well, we can't make decisions, so we need to add more people to our board. Like, what? You think adding more people is going to help you make better decisions? No, it's just going to add more complexity and chaos and so forth. It might produce better decisions at some point, but it's not going to make them simpler, and it's not going to, there's not a direct correlation. So just be careful. That's all I would say is, it's pride goes before fall, right? And we can find pride in anything. I'll just rephrase that. I can find pride in anything. I'm as much wisdom as I think I may have gotten through a bunch of hard knocks and learning the hard way and making some mistakes. I'm as susceptible to flattery and opportunity and ego as I've ever been, right? And I think that's what we have to watch out for. Is somebody's going to come along, oh, you guys, you're amazing, and yeah, I want you to do this, and I want you to get involved in this, and you're like, oh, that sounds like a really good thing, and one thing leads to another. The next thing you know where you started from. And if you look at any organization that's ever like think about like Enron or any of those places that had like these big, huge collapses. Nobody woke up one day and said, hey, you know what, we should just go defraud all of our stockholders, right? That'd be a great idea. Nobody did that. They made little decisions one day at a time that compounded each other, and next thing you know, you're rationalizing whatever it is you're doing. And so those are the things you gotta watch out for. And it's not just that you'll fail at something, because that sometimes can be really motivating and actually be a good thing. It's that you might get too successful at something, and it takes you to a place you don't want to be. You know, but I have absolutely no idea what that might look like. It's just a pattern that I've seen play itself out.
So, anybody have any context-related questions to kind of what we're going through for Michael, as we wrap up?
I think you brought a good point about the adding more people to the problem you cannot solve, thinking that it's going to magically solve, right? It's going to add more complexity, it's going to be more consensus that you have to buy in, and the organization is not effective, right? The reason you're thinking that you're adding more people is you're not being effective. You're not communicating among yourselves, or you're not using all your resources, and you're thinking, oh, we're going to add more people. We need outsiders, right?
Yeah.
And that's a great example, I think.
Yeah. It happens that way to a lot of the startups and companies I'm dealing with. What do? They go out and get investors.
Right.
And that's great. Investors come in, spend a bunch of money. But now those investors want a seat on the board. They want a direction. Now they're driving the company based on a return on their money, as opposed to maybe the vision the company has. And every organization goes through that. And so as you take on funding or as you get more people, that dynamic always changes. It's not necessarily always a bad thing.
Right.
You just have to be cognizant of it. And if you have a core set of principles that stays consistent,
Right.
you're less likely to kind of veer off in those things, because you always have the way to kind of bring it back and say, wait a minute, is this part of our mission? This might be a great thing, but this is completely off mission for us. You know, and therefore we should go find someone else who might be better at doing that than us, and maybe we don't do that. But it's.
I mean, it's a balance, right? I mean, there are organizations, they're too prideful, so they try to, stick to themselves as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's normal. It's human, right? I mean, somebody comes along and goes, oh wow, you're amazing, you're awesome, I would love for you to be involved in this, and it's natural that we want to do that.
Yeah, I work with a very big company, and I go to a very big church, and I see, the shortfalls, right, of organizations compared to this. At the same time, I see, hey, I wish I had some of that resource from the big organization, even 1%. Thrown down to organization like this, and we're gonna enrich so much, right?
Yeah.
It's like one drop of oil in a cog of gears, and it's a balance.
It changes stuff.
Yeah,
Again, it's not always bad. Nobody said this was easy.
Right, and I like the fact that you said chaos, your dirty laundries, right? Behind the curtain, right? The perfect orchestrated activities, right? And you go behind the curtain, it's a mess. It's kind of like Asian people saying, you don't want to see the kitchen. If you enjoy the cuisine, you don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
The moment you go back there, you don't want to work for the sausage factory, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to see the sausage being made, right? For sure.
You never eat that,
Yeah.
Same thing with Chinese dumplings. Don't want to know what goes in there, right?
I just had dumplings tonight, so that's let's hope it was all
It's
good
no
stuff.
different than sausage, right?
No, you're absolutely right.
I can go on
Yeah.
until my wife's gonna, go like this in the back.
But you're right. I mean, that's the reality to think about. Is this back of the house or front of the house? And once you experience that visual, it's hard to not think that way anymore. Like next time you go into a hotel, intentionally go find one of the doors that takes you to the back of the house, and just stand there for a second and look between and just go, okay, yeah, that's front of the house, back of the house. I don't really care what's happening there as long as it doesn't affect this, right? Same with the kitchen, same with a lot of different things. And remember, this is the back of the house. This isn't the front of the house. This is the back. The front of the house.
So
is
how
the
do you?
backstand,
So
half
do you make this back of the house transparent, or you make it secret? See, that's $1 million question to me, because so we're so wrapped up on the process, right? And making it back of the house, front of the house. For Gideon, do you think? I think he wants to know, right?
I think it depends. That's always the best answer. If you're ever stuck, just say it depends.
Okay.
It's always correct.
I'm gonna learn from that. That depends.
I teach at a couple of universities.
Leadership
and
gold right there.
Yeah, I teach my students, you know, like we were talking about all this employment law stuff, and I'm like, the answer is always, it depends, right? But I think it does depend, because in some ways it might be, here's the thing, people will make assumptions based on what they see. Sometimes you need to connect the dots for them so they have a more clear picture. But sometimes those dots don't need to be connected because they don't have anything to do with each other, right? So if somebody says, well, you know, do you have any, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of the restaurant, but you know, what do you put in
I only
this?
brought it out. I don't.
Yeah, like what do you put into this or something like that, and you say no, look, these are the ingredients what we use. You know, you think about I don't like Chipotle or someplace. You know,
I remember Subway being told bringing transparency. Process.
put it all out there so I can kind of see what's going in there, mod pizza, whatever. You know, so there are times when that's effective. But what you don't put out in front of them is, you know, we just fired 3 people last week, and you know the manager is having an affair with this. You know, that has nothing to do with the pizza you're buying, right? So it depends on what that is. You know, if would it help Gideon to understand how fundraising happens and how the organization works in order to support him? On some level, probably, right? Because he maybe has no idea. On the other hand, there's probably a lot of stuff you could share that wouldn't do anything but have them go, ooh, I don't know what that is. That's, you know, here's the thing: people never fill in neutral information gaps positively. Nobody says, I don't know what's going on, but it must be good. Nobody does that ever. I've built an entire career out of that reality: is that people don't. You know, we all think the answer's behind like either door. We think the answer's behind door A, which is somebody knows exactly what they're doing and they're not telling us, and so we're a victim, right? And that's awesome because we get all kinds of little, you know, we get little psychological hits all the way through there, right? We get, yes, there is certainty in life, and I'm a victim, and you know, what if the answer's behind door B? And behind door B is nobody has any idea what the heck they're doing. You experience it as if it's coming to you, but it has nothing to do with you. Door B is a lot scarier than door A. I prefer door A all the time, every time that somebody's intentionally, deliberately not doing something to impact me. I don't know what to do with door B. I don't know what to do with that. But that's more often the reality. And so you don't want to sort of open it up to somebody and go, it's total crapshoot. We have any idea what we're doing, and it's just a bunch of people running in circles, you know. You know, so you just got to use some wisdom, I guess, in that regard. I don't, you know, but I have the same exact scenario and all the time at work. I'll tell you one story where I did connect the dots. I had a person that came to me, the last company I was with, and said, I want to complain because the company is really not treating me well. I applied for a job, and it took them 4 months to come back and give me any information. Like, that is so disrespectful. I said, let me show you something. And I pulled up, I went back 4 months, and I said, you see this number? This is the budget number. And this is how many headcount we had, and this is how many open jobs we had. So we had a budget of 35 people in this department. We had 37 people in the department, and we had 3 open jobs. What's the problem? And he's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I go, I know.
To fire people?
I go, I know. It didn't make sense. So I went to the CFO and I said, well, is the budget wrong? I went to the head of the department and said, do we have too many people? And they both said the opposite thing. And it took us 4 months to figure it back out. And then when we figured it out, we gave you the job that was open the whole time. So I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse. The good news is it has nothing to do with you. The bad news is we're a bunch of morons that don't know how to figure this out. So, you know, there you go. And he walked out of the office going, wow, like I did not expect that.
I'd love to hear that, in my opinion.
But what he understood was, look, it wasn't personal. Now, you still experienced it personally. Now, he also walked out the door going, yeah, I kind of get why you couldn't have told me that along the way.
Right.
I'm like, it's not like we sat back here with the answer and I'm just like, we're not telling this guy. It's that didn't know what we were doing. And think about how much of our life and how much of our lives are actually us being in those situations all the time. You just described 3 of them as I sat here,
Right.
right? About when things get done and you paid this person and that guy ran off and you know.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know that you necessarily want to know that if you're writing checks,
Right.
right? But you know, you need to know some context behind how things are working, and then have some more wisdom on this one.
Right.
But this is this isn't
Yeah.
the front of the house. So
Right.
that's why I love that analogy, because these guys do know what's, you know, the food sometimes gets dumped on the floor. You know?
Yeah.
You don't want to feed that to anybody, but you know, in some restaurants they do.
Yeah.
Now you guys gonna use that line, huh? The restaurant business, huh?
There's a great scene in the movie The Big Short. Have you guys seen that movie? One of the best films of all time about the housing market crash. But there's a scene where it's got the chef, what was the guy, tragically killed himself, Bourdain. And he's describing how this whole sort of house of cards financial thing was set up. And he goes, so let's say you got all this halibut and it's left over. And he goes, I don't know, maybe they came out that halibut has the intelligence of dolphins or something. He goes, but nobody wants halibut. He goes, what do? You know, you don't just throw it away. No, you do. What you do is you cut it all up and you put it with some other stuff into a fish stew, and then you serve that, and now it's a whole new thing. Anyway. So, anything else? Was this helpful at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it did. Yeah.
Anything else I can answer about this subject or life in general?
And I know you're coming into a context you don't fully have all the information, but the things you're saying we can fit and take these gold and these gems and be like, okay, that.
Yeah.
I mean, you answered many questions. That
Well, and I'll give you a really specific example. You actually presented a real need and a point A to point B scenario for me.
right.
Like I get calls constantly, you know, I want you to attend this auction, I want you to like donate to this cause or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess I could just randomly send you some money, but if you get up there and say, we need a new playground apparatus for our kids, and it costs $22,000, and we're trying to raise $22,000 for that. People are more likely to donate to that than just say, hey, in general, we need a bunch of money for, you know, some stuff. You know, just give me some money. You
Yeah.
created a very specific need that I'm like, okay, I can now visualize that and say, okay, well, that seems like a good investment for me. That seems like something that would be put to incredible use. Probably get better use out of that van than any other van in the world.
Right.
And so why wouldn't I do that? That seems like, you know, you connected the dots for me. And I think that's really important, you know. And again, back to your question about how do you get more men involved, in some cases you just got to connect the dots like that. We need a team of people to go to Malawi. Where the heck's Malawi and why would I go there?
Right.
No, what we need a team of people to do is specifically go do and do this thing. So like when I went to Honduras and built that school, we knew exactly what we were going for. You're going to be pounding nails, you're going to be building this thing, you're going to be painting this, you know, whatever it is you're going to do. And that allowed people, me in particular, to get engaged in it. And also gave a lot of clarity to the organization.
Right. And I'll add to this, his engagement was not just going there, bringing his family, but he put it on Facebook. He messaged all his friends. He messaged me. He messaged, like, and he invited other people to participate in the process. What do you think stops people from actually doing that? Because some people don't take that next step. They're like, this is great for my family,
Right.
or my church.
I think here's one of the things I've learned, because that's a really good point. And I had to do this with companies all the time. How do you get every member of your organization to be a brand ambassador of your company? The simplest and easiest way is to make it mind-numbingly easy for somebody to do something. So I would send an email out saying, hey, we are just launching new product X, or we want to highlight something. Here is, copy paste this, click into your LinkedIn and post it. That's it. Simple. You got to make it simple. People are not going to do complex things.
Right.
If it takes me 5 steps to get there, I've lost interest on step 2, right? Or I won't even start because I'm like, I can't think about that. So you have to make it mind-numbingly simple and easy. You know, we need to raise, go on your Facebook and do like one of those GoFundMe things. We need to raise X amount of dollars for this. How many of those do I donate to? You follow me on Facebook.
Right.
How many of those do I donate to a day? Or a week or something?
Right.
Like, I don't know. Like, everybody's got a birthday, and everybody does that for their birthday, and it's like, okay, $100 to you, $100 to you, whatever. You know, because it's easy. I don't have to do anything.
Right.
It's all set up on my phone. I don't even know where the money, I don't even know what account the money comes out of. I just click it, and
The magic happens.
somebody gets $50 or something.
How much would you measure the importance of feedback, informational feedback on a goal financially that people actually respond to? You know, what's their
The
experience?
bigger the investment, the more the feedback, just straight correlation. If you want someone to give you $50, whatever, they'll probably give you $50. You want someone to give you $5,000, then yeah, you should probably get them involved and follow back up with them and send them emails. And you know, I think the last time you went to Malawi, because I donated, I think, to that trip, you sent a bunch of pictures. I'm like, this is what we're doing. I'm like, that's cool. See, that's good. It's like, I have no idea what you were doing in Austria. I mean, it looked like a fun trip, but I have no idea what that was. But in Malawi, I understood it because I could see what you were doing.
Right.
And so I think to the point is, the more, you know, do you want to get, let's say you had to raise $100,000. You can get one person to write you a $100,000 check. You can get 100,000 people to give you $1 each, or something in between, right? So if you're trying to get a whole bunch of people to give small amounts of money, then it's just about how clear is the message. It needs to be really crystal clear. Why do people donate to most of those things? Because it's hugely compelling. Like, I don't know politically where anybody stands, but one of my favorite podcasts is this guy named Matt Walsh. And so AOC, you all know who AOC is, made some story up about her poor grandmother in Puerto Rico. And so Matt Walsh said, we're going to help her grandmother. And he put a GoFundMe out and raised $500,000 in like 4 hours. Now, I think, and he did it as kind of a joke, I think, to be honest with you. But I gave $20. Just to spite AOC, right?
Yeah.
If it's simple, if it's easy, if you can connect the dots between here and here, I need to do X, and create a story there, people will participate.
But you had a personal, emotional interest in it too, because you said
Not a positive one in this
Yeah.
case, but yeah.
you had
Then they have to get that money
emotional
back?
experience with it.
He did,
Despite
yes.
that. Yeah.
No, it's true, and so, but the things that you're doing should resonate with people.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that I had no idea until I just sat down here that a part of building this school, I'm thinking, okay, you built a school, that's pretty cool. No, you built a well. People had to walk 30 minutes each way to get water. Now they walk 5. Like, that's your headline.
Right.
That's what you're trying to get people to do. You know, that's the person. You know, I'm now not building a well in Africa. I have a picture in my head, maybe accurate or not, of a literal person, a woman who is walking to get water for her family, and instead of walking 30 minutes or an hour, she walks 5. Now, what went through my head was, you have a woman who has a family and has to leave her kids for an hour to go get water, and now has to leave them for 10 minutes to go get water. That's super compelling. That's really compelling. Like, I don't think fundraising is going to be your problem, right, to be honest with you. But you have to have the story that resonates. And it has to be, and here's where organizations, where it's hard is, have you heard of the curse of knowledge? So the curse of knowledge is, you forget what it's like to not know what you know. Therefore, you don't share it, because it never occurs to you. The more involved you get with an organization, the higher your curse of knowledge becomes. So you're not connecting the dots in the same way as an outsider would, who doesn't know anything. Because you forget, oh yeah, I got all this context or whatever, but you don't think about it. You know, and you said 3 things tonight that were totally different from anything I've ever heard from you, and I hear from you all the time. So, but that's the curse of knowledge at play, right? And you have to think about it from your audience's perspective, you know. And if to me, what I love about the Gospels in particular is how Jesus was phenomenally, you know, different as a communicator. He communicated differently to everybody. You know, sometimes they'd come up and tell him the answer. Sometimes he'd just randomly tell them some story and hope they connected the dots, I guess. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to deal with you, and I'm going to over here and take a nap. I mean, it's all over the place. Nobody talks about that, which is kind of weird in my opinion. But there's a good lesson there that we have to be very adept at getting our message through in very different ways to different people. Now, Jesus had the advantage of being able to kind of know their thoughts and their hearts, and you know that helps obviously, but still didn't use the same approach. Used wildly different approaches. So those are things that I think could really help your mission, is to be, and it goes back to the principle. Are you trying to build a school in Malawi, or are you trying to change the lives of people? In what way?
Right, trying to change lives.
Right. You could change lives in a lot of different ways. You could buy them like goats, or you could buy them cars, or you know, you could do all kinds of stuff, right? Why a school, right?
Right.
Is it the school, or is it the well, or is it creates a centralized thing, it brings a community together? There's a whole bunch of stuff there.
Yeah.
What you'll have to tease out is, what is the core of what we're doing, and how is this helping us do that? And when you can make those dots connect, you know, I don't think you have to worry about it being compelling. I think it naturally attracts people who want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Because people need that. People want to make it, especially now. Like, you don't want to watch the news, right? You want to feel good about what's going on and make a difference to people. So, more than ever, I think there's an opportunity for people who want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. It's been super helpful. And one of the leadership lessons that you learn when you're around Michael is, the last time he spoke, I got a call 30 minutes later. So tell me where I messed up. Tell me where I can improve. And like I said, I had all of these people come in. Nobody ever asked that. Nobody ever asked for feedback. I shouldn't say nobody. There are people, but it's one of those things that, you know, we can't be shy about asking for feedback. So it's great.
Feedback is good.
Yeah. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, it's nice to meet all of you.
Yeah. Thanks for encouraging us, inspiring us.
It's a really cool thing you're doing. So it's you know, and look, I just am one voice with some experience. You know, take what you need and go with it, and ignore what you don't. Awesome. All right, now I gotta go figure out what's going on with the Mariners, because they gotta win tonight.
Huskies are tied.
That's good.
Fourth quarter.
Nobody cares about the Mariners.
Come on.
The Raiders fans.
Come on. It's the first time we've been in the playoffs in 20 years.
I know, since I was in college, I refused to lose.
Yeah, Katura, my daughter, she asked, how much money